So good morning, everyone. I just wanted to welcome you all on behalf of Thrive. My name is Georgia Farouk. I know many of you in the room today. I'm the Executive Director of Thrive, the Alliance of Nonprofits for all of San Mateo County. And we wanted to welcome you to our Thrive and Social Impact Advisory Group series that we have been doing for a couple years now, but now virtually. And we really want to first mention that we hope everyone is staying safe. We're thinking of all of those in our region who have been impacted by the wildfires, especially those in Pescadero who've been evacuated. So our thoughts are with them, and we'll be monitoring the situation. So for those of you that don't know, again, Thrive's partnership with SIAG began a couple years back, and since then we've co-hosted cross-sector meetings on topics ranging from grassroots community organizing to diversifying our candidate pipelines to healthcare. Special thanks to Maya Tessing, who will be facilitating today and who has been facilitating all of these events and organizing them. Maya of Fairlight Advisors, who is the driving force behind SIAG with her partner, Catherine Earhart, and also behind the series, and also a special thanks to Petra Sultan, who on the Thrive side, who has been organizing this, our Director of Advocacy and Education, who you'll be hearing from later. We want to invite you all to visit our website. Please bookmark it if you haven't visited it before, thrivealliance.org, to learn the latest on Thrive, our COVID-19 response efforts, our racial justice organizing, and all of the ways that you can become engaged as a member. This membership is, we have over 200 members. It's a cross-sector membership, and it's definitely more important than ever to stand together as an alliance and as a community. So please think about that, and we welcome you to our community. And today's special program on housing, on the topic of housing, is co-hosted by Thrive's Basic Needs and Safety Net group. It's part of our Thrive Action groups, one of 5 Thrive Action groups. And housing is a big topic, so I'm just going to pass it over now for a few words from the chair of that group. Many of you know Bart Charlo. He is the CEO of Samaritan House, and he's been leading our Basic Needs and Safety Net group. And Bart, thank you for being here today and sharing a little bit about how this is relevant to the Thrive community.
Well, thanks everybody for being here today, because this is really important. Our get-togethers, learning together, working together, are the key to our making things happen together. And at our Basic Needs and Safety Net tag, we've been taking up a variety of issues as they come, and they do intersect, you know, everything from food to shelter to senior services to mental health. But the one abiding concern has been forever, and that is the affordability of housing in the area. We were able to work through some position statements that Thrive has taken up. I would encourage you to take a look at them. They're pretty simple and direct, and they do speak to what we hope would both facilitate and encourage the development of more truly affordable housing, which we desperately need here. There are folks who read the newspapers and believe that everybody's moving out of the area, so why do we have a housing crisis? Well, everybody isn't moving out of the area by any means, and we still have a housing crisis, and it's going to get worse with the rent crisis that we're all going to be facing. So it is exciting to see that there are new models coming out. Some of us have been working individually or in our collaborations to develop different avenues to ensure that there is more affordable housing and that we don't lose the affordable housing that we have. But it's always good to find out about new and exciting models, because there is no one model that's going to solve this problem. And if we've got a menu of them, ones that we know work and ones that we know work in places like ours, if not directly in ours, then we'll know what to choose and what to emphasize, and that will stand us in good stead. So I'm going to turn it back over to Georgia, and thank you all for being here. Let's do this.
All right, Maya Tessing, please introduce yourself and
Excellent.
Great program.
Thank you, Georgia, Petra, Bart, for the introduction. My name is Maya Tessing, and I am a partner with Fairlight Advisors, and founded this Social Impact Advisory Group with my partner, Catherine Earhart, in partnership with Thrive. We wanted to look for others like ourselves who serve the nonprofit community as consultants, board members, public official, to bring increased awareness to the needs of nonprofits to promote their stability and strength. So as Bart was saying, you know, today's topic puts special meaning to the term shelter in place, and particularly those on our panel understand that. The need for affordable housing was a crisis before we had the healthcare and economic crises, so it makes it even a lot more needed attention now, particularly since talks in Congress still are stalled on a new economic relief package. So the panelists we've invited are experts in this area of affordable housing. They have a passion for it. And as you know, the Bay Area is not alone in this, but the Bay Area has had increased focus in, as Bart was saying, the news has focused particularly on the peninsula. So I'm going to give you a brief introduction to our four panelists. The first is Kate Comfort-Har. She's the executive director of HIP Housing, a San Mateo County-based nonprofit specializing in creative, affordable housing solutions that proudly helps to house 1,400 people each year. In her tenure with HIP Housing, Kate has been dedicated to program and property development and has been a frequent speaker on a wide range of affordable housing topics. Our second panelist is Jonathan Fern. He oversees development activities for all Gray Star projects in Redwood City and Santa Clara. In addition to obtaining discretionary approval entitlements, his primary responsibilities include due diligence, forecasting and budgeting, initial land and site planning, architecture, design, government relations, and community outreach. Jonathan is a member of the Oakland Planning Commission, a member of the RHNA Housing Methodology Committee, a board member of Housing Trust Silicon Valley, and a founding member of the Casita Coalition, an advocacy group created to advocate for small building forums throughout California. We have Raj Patel. He's a general partner of the Golden Gate Opportunity Fund, a residential development fund that focuses on workforce housing supply and other ESG-related property development in the city and county of San Francisco. He is also a venture investor, management consultant, and corporate strategist. He has built early stage products and services for consumers for 10 plus years and has done emerging market startups, general private equity investing for 5. Raj is a strong advocate for poverty reduction through entrepreneurship. And lastly, we have Julie Mahwald, is devoted to bringing impact capital to solve the most entrenched social problems, especially affordable housing. In Julie's role as Chief Financial Officer of Housing Trust Silicon Valley, her responsibilities include strategy and planning, capital structure and capital raise, accounting, treasury, as well as admin and operations. She's part of the leadership team bringing the Tech Fund, the Apple Affordable Housing Fund, and Google's recent launch initiative to fruition, each investing funds to start up or preserve affordable homes within months of establishment. Okay, thank you for being here, our panelists. We're really excited for this conversation. And I'd like to start with Kate. So you have a very interesting story about how you started in this sector. And I'd like to kick out, how did we get here? What's the evolution of this affordable housing crisis?
Great, well, I have a couple of slides. They're part of a larger presentation that I do. So if we could bring up the first slide, be great. Okay, so how did we get here? So this is a focus particularly on San Mateo County. And what you can see from this slide is that we're a county that's bordered on both sides by water. We got the bay and we got the ocean on either side of us. We've got San Francisco County to the north, Santa Clara County to the south, and in between, in San Mateo County, about 70% of our land is protected land, and that's something that we all cherish and really don't want to change. So that means that the portion of buildable land is a very fine strip that runs primarily along the bay side with a little bit on the coast. with so much restriction in how and where you can build, what ends up happening is the cost of land is driven way, way up. On top of that, you've got construction costs that are driven up, which ultimately lead to higher rents once housing is built. That's if you can get it built at all. So what essentially happens is there really are no market forces in San Mateo County that allow for affordable housing. We have an abundance of high-paying jobs and people who can pay high rents. And as a result, those who can't pay those rents are pretty much forced out. There's no, and we'll never be able to build enough to cover the gap of what we have in terms of people who need housing and people who have access to housing. So let's go to slide number 2. So between 2010 and 2017, we added 84,000 new jobs to San Mateo County, but only 7,000 units of housing. That's a 12-to-1 ratio. It's not sustainable. And people don't realize that for every one high-tech, high-paying job, you create 7 service positions. So not everybody who's coming in the workforce is going to be high-paid. Next slide. So what does our workforce look like? We have about 340,000 jobs in our county. Of those, 213,000 plus are commuting from outside of San Mateo County. That means they have to come in and out and in and out every single day. Even more stressing is, and this again is in normal times, not currently right now, but we will get back to this, there's no doubt. About 77,000 of those who are commuting are coming from beyond San Francisco, Santa Clara, and Alameda counties. So what does that mean? Next slide. Traffic, right? People assume, they have this like conventional wisdom assumption that if you bring more housing, you're going to bring more traffic. But the reality is, imagine if 212,000 people didn't have to commute in and out. If they lived close to their jobs, if they could walk or bike or take transit, it actually reduces the intensity of the traffic. And another point to remember is it's really the lower paid workforce who's forced out, right? People who can pay higher rents will likely stay as best they can. But it's those lower paid workers, the service workers, the folks who make this such a great community to live in that are forced out. We also have some of the highest transportation costs in the country between insurance, gas, tolls for bridges. The people who can least afford it are being pushed out. So eventually they get to the point where they can't afford to live here, but they can't afford to commute either. And that puts us in a real risky position for having the services available that we need. School teachers, baristas, all the kinds of things that the whole range of workforce who aren't necessarily high-tech, high-paid. So that's a little bit of how we got here, right? We have confined buildable space. We have an abundance of great jobs. We actually also have an abundance of lower paid workforce and no true market forces that will ever allow us to create affordable housing naturally. So we have to be intentional about it. We have to think about it and find ways to bring more affordable housing and preserve that we have. And many of the panelists here today have some really great ideas about how to do that. So just a broad overview. I'm happy to take additional questions offline.
Excellent. Thank you, Kate. That's a great introduction. I want to turn it over to Jonathan, who's been a partner with HIP Housing and also with Julie as a board member. Could you, Jonathan, talk about the role of real estate developers in this, a very key and kind of some basics of how a real estate developer has the incentive to get involved in this issue?
Sure thing. Good morning, everybody. I have just one slide that I can pull up to, kind of quick development 101. So, really is, and just for a caveat, this is an assessment about how a for-profit developer takes a look at whether or not to start with a project. Affordable housing, much more complicated for many, many different ways, as a lot of you all know. But this, what I'm talking to, is strictly just how a for-profit developer will look at things. And, end of the day, it's really kind of binary. It's can you sell something for more than it costs to build it, in essence. So this is just, at the risk of oversimplifying things, because it is much more complicated than this. This is an example on the left of a project that a developer would proceed with. So you start with what you think your final revenue is going to be at $500,000, and you take out all of your costs. And what you have at the end is a thing called a land residual, which is what you are able to give a landowner to purchase their land. Now that obviously has to be at a level that the landowner will accept, but in this case, we're just going to assume that will happen. But what we always talk about is many things can impact whether or not a developer moves forward with a project. I have highlighted because it's the developer favorite to highlight, but if your fees go up by $40,000 per unit, what you can see here is that the project then ceases on the right. You no longer have the ability to provide any kind of payment for the land. But that could be anything, that could be construction costs could go up $40,000 a unit, or we get into an issue like today and sales prices or rental prices could go down 10%. So many things affect whether developer moves forward. But a couple of things I just wanted to just highlight related to this slide that aren't necessarily that don't stand out. Developers work on spreads. I mean, they don't work on total dollar amounts. And that's important because number one, if a developer meets its hurdle, if you look at the bottom line there, the 10% equity hurdle, that's just an example. But if we meet that, we'll proceed on a project regardless of the cost or the top line revenue. So in essence, if we get a 10% equity hurdle of profit met, the sales price would go down to $300,000 or $200,000, or it could go up to $1.2 million. It really, all that really matters is, can we meet a hurdle? And that's important. The second thing is that, as Kate mentioned, land is very valuable and very sought after. So cost savings, when we talk about cost savings in a project, if our construction costs were to go down by $20,000 a unit, that would most likely end up in the hands of the landowner, because we would then have more money to provide for the landowner, which would make us more competitive to a landowner versus our competitors. So that's also important. The other thing I'll just say is that people say, well, why can't you guys just take less profit? And it's an interesting question. We get it a lot. But even if a developer were to eliminate their profit, most of the projects that we're talking about that are being constructed in San Mateo County are high density, institutional level apartment complexes, Class A apartment complexes. And developers have very few places to go to get the money required, either from the equity side or the debt side, other than institutional capital sources. And those institutional capital sources, that money does not have to go into real estate. That money it flows where they can get the best return for their money. And so if they can get money in stocks or some other alternative investment, they will do so. So developers really don't have, especially institutional developers, don't have many options when it comes to the returns that are required for the projects that we're talking about. So, or that predominate what we build in San Mateo County. So with that, I'll turn it back over.
Okay, great. That's a great overview. So the next part we want to come to is the money part. And so I want to turn it over Raj and Julie, who have kind of different roles here. I'm going to start with Raj on the investor philanthropic side. I mean, you are a passionate San Franciscan who's working particularly in San Francisco County. Tell us a little about why you got into this and what you're hoping, how are you collaborating with these different forces?
Great, thanks so much. So this is a perfect segue from some of Jonathan's comments. So I've always been passionate about innovation, and I love the idea of solving the housing crisis in San Francisco because it touches all of us in the broader 9-county Bay Area, of course, including San Mateo County. Up until recently, there's been a generalized focus on affordable housing, and today we're seeing more expansion into the concept of workforce housing. which catches a whole group of potential or current residents of San Francisco and the broader 9-county Bay Area that may not fit the technical definition of income brackets to qualify for affordable housing, yet also are key contributors to the economy. So workforce housing can attract, workforce housing is for a group of people who may not fit within the affordable housing definition, but also based off of their own income, simply cannot afford market rate. The exciting part with real estate development, and this is a little bit based off of what Jonathan mentioned, is how do we address the cost side of construction? And so what we're focused on is how do we really innovate interior design such that we are able to reduce the actual price per square foot and also access some of the more innovative construction approaches. There's a startup out of Stanford, a Stanford alum who has a company called Bone Structures. And just to give you one example, it is possible to innovate even in construction materials and go beyond traditional material configurations of steel, concrete, and wood, and focus on almost pure steel construction. But instead of just applying that to single family, we might consider that for high density urban, multi-story urban residential. So I think when we look at the configuration, the macroeconomic issues with constructing housing in the Bay Area, we need to not obsess so much on what the labor cost might be, for example, which is essentially built into the cost side, but really push the envelope on how to innovate to further reduce on the cost side outside of labor. San Mateo County is really interesting because I think, as was already mentioned, when you look at the map, we have a multi-generational commitment together with the Peninsula Trust to preserve a gigantic swath of the square mileage of San Mateo County for non-future development. But that doesn't mean that there's not space left to develop. There are many plots along Interstate 101, for example, where high density residential housing can be inserted inside San Mateo County, but there needs to be a broader conversation about to allay the NIMBY fears of the broader population about what the impact is in terms of foot traffic, in terms of generalized motorized traffic, if new housing is built. And I think that conversation can unlock, let's call, some social innovation in order to get these projects approved. That was a quick comments, not on financing, but here's the exciting part about financing. Traditionally, right, Jonathan, there's always a discussion between banks and partnering with banks to have a mix of equity and debt. What we see nowadays is the whole emergence of ESG, environmental, social, and governance investments. And that can come from a foundation, that can come from a for-profit investment fund that has a sliver of their fund dedicated towards ESG, environmental, social, and governance funding, and of course, social impact funds. The challenge today is because of the pandemic, many of these institutions are now focused on dedicating their funding to public health matters. But that doesn't mean money's completely off the table. And it's important for people to make sure that their investment pitches go towards, if they want to source their funding from a foundation or a social impact fund, for example, reach out and really explain if it can be quantified, the impact, the social impact of producing more workforce housing. So.
Thank you, Raj. Before I get to Julie, one thing I forgot to ask the audience: if you are working on an initiative toward affordable housing, please go to the participants area, raise your hand, and Petra is going to moderate a lightning round of everybody about 1 to 2 minutes, depending on how many people would like to say something. But raise your hands now so Petra can record those, and we'll have those at the end. So now I want to turn to Julie. I mean, the Housing Trust is in a very kind of complicated but unique role in this ecosystem, and like to hear kind of how they work, and particularly you're talking about kind of collaboration. You're collaborating heavily with some of the corporate citizens.
Thanks so much, Maya. And I just want to actually first riff off of what Raj said. If you're trying to petition for affordable housing in this health crisis, this has just proven that affordable housing is a social determinant of health. So to me, it is health, and it fits right into where funders are looking at this point. But maybe the first slide, and I'll talk through, a little bit about what we do and also just some basics about how we fit into the capital stack of affordable housing, so some of you can understand what that is, and also our partnerships that we've been developing. So Housing Trust, named Silicon Valley, we work in 13 counties in the Bay Area. And in fact, we really focused this last year on growing outside the Bay Area, and half of our lending last year was outside of Santa Clara County. So we're what's called a CDFI, a Community Development Finance Institution. You can also think of that as a bank to the underserved. We will finance things that banks traditionally do not want to finance. There are 2,000 of us in the country, CDFIs, and their assets comprise over $200 billion. We are one of a handful of those 2,000 that have an S&P rating, and we're really proud that for 5 years that rating has been renewed at AA-, and that is a little bit of how what helps us to raise funds from these corporations as we have. And our impact is there on the slide. We're really proud that of the funds we've raised and our impact. It's really just starting to take off, though. We're really on a trajectory now that it's growing very quickly. And then maybe the next slide, please. So I won't read you this slide, but our work spans homeownership programs, grants to those experiencing homelessness, and even a nascent ADU loan program that we're hoping to be able to launch later this summer. It's been a little tricky to put it together, but we think it's almost there. But I will talk to you today more about multifamily lending, and that is our sweet spot. That's where we do most of our work. And if you want to take the slide off now, that would be fine. To build an affordable apartment from ground up, or to preserve affordable housing, there's a complex web, as somebody mentioned, of financing to take a developer from buying the land on the open market and then getting all the way to the long-term financing so that they could break even. As you saw, all those costs that Jonathan showed, they don't really change for affordable housing. So there needs to be really an affordable or cheap financing available, and sometimes free land. There's a lot of different subsidies that are pulled together so that when this developer finishes, they can charge below market rents, because that's the point. So Housing Trust is a lender in two places in this process. Traditionally, we lend to help these affordable housing developers, and often they're competing with market rate developers to purchase land and or do pre-development work, so getting the architects ready and getting entitlements and all of that. And so we'll lend that money in that early stage when banks do not want to lend. But then we're traditionally taken out by a construction lender, because banks are happy to lend at that spot. Then the long-term piece that I talked about could have all kinds of subsidies from cities, counties. There could be land donated. There's something called local housing tax credit investors, which I won't go into. Some of you know probably about it. All of those things a developer has to pull together, and they might apply to 5 or 10 programs. I still really am impressed with how they do this, cobble together the financing they need. But that can also often leave them in a spot where they've got 5 out of the 6 they applied for, but they have a gap. And they're missing $1 million or $5 million in order to get shovels in the ground and start building the housing. And so with this recent grant we got from Apple, it was actually granted funds. We were able to offer some financing for developers just in that spot. And so we were taking projects that were stuck. We were able to make a very low cost, very flexible loan to them that would fit within all the other capital they have lined up, and then get shovels in the ground maybe a year or 2 years before they would have, because they were truly stuck in this financing. And so grant funds are excellent to work in that space. As a CDFI, for our money, where we traditionally get it, has been sometimes grants from the federal government. We still get a little bit from them, states, counties, cities, as well as low-cost loans from banks. And then 3 years ago, we created something we call the Community Impact Note. And that is for accredited investors. It's a private placement of debt. And it's a below market rate. It's a social impact investment. And we borrow that money using the full faith and credit of our balance sheet and our S&P rating. And then we on-lend that to developers. And we're very proud that we've raised to date $117 million in this fund called the Tech Fund. And not quite spent it all, but it will revolve. And so far we've helped start up 3,000 homes in the past 3 years just with the Tech Fund. We envisioned the private investors would buy this. What really happened is we had a lot of corporations and some philanthropy that got very excited about it. And so instead we got very large investments from Cisco, Google, LinkedIn, NetApp, and Pure Storage. So some really high-tech companies. And some philanthropy as well. Sobrato and Packard and Grove Foundation all invested in this note. And so that's been super successful. And so, but recently, even more of a breakthrough, I think, for these impact funds and for CDFIs around the country has been that corporations are starting to invest in really interesting ways, and in not only affordable housing, but small business lending. I think traditionally, if you asked an impact investment advisor, where can I go to invest? They would always say, go to your local CDFI. They know what's happening and they're on the ground and working. And so when Google just announced a partnership, or they just announced their social responsibility bond. And I don't know if anyone heard of this, but it was a $10 billion bond offering. They're taking advantage of really cheap rates, and half of it was a sustainability bond. So some of that will be used in their climate objectives. But they made a point of saying that this work, in their use of proceeds, the work they do with Housing Trust and with other CDFIs in the country is going to be supported by this bond. So they're really jumping into what Raj was talking about, these ESG efforts. So the work they did with us was the Tech Fund, but also we now have yet a new fund that we just announced called Launch Initiative with Google. You know, they have $1 billion effort to solve the housing crisis or be part of the solution in the Bay Area. And as part of that, we're actually in this fund, we're working side by side with them. So we are actually investing their balance sheet. They're not loaning us the money, which is helpful. It's capacity building for us. And we are the servicer and the advisor as they place monies in the affordable housing ecosystem. And they're starting to not only do the front end that I talked about, the acquisition pre-development, they're starting to think about longer term loans and about other innovative types of loans they can make. And what's really great about this is how excited the teams are at Apple, Google, and we also work with Facebook a little bit. They really are wanting to be part of the solution, and they're really proud of their work. And I'm just really encouraged that corporations are starting to join in, and I think we will get more creative solutions out of it.
Thank you, Julie. I want to turn over to Jonathan and Kate. You two have made a unique solution around some policy challenges to launch a project. Could either one of you kind of kick that off and how it came to be?
So Jonathan, if you don't mind, can I lead? Okay. So there's a couple things that I want to discuss. I think Julia was great. Thank you so much for that. And CDFIs are a very important part of the financing stack that we need to put together as affordable housing developers. In the old days, we were pretty much dependent on government for financing and financing tools for affordable housing through community development block grants, through other pass-through funds from HUD. Really, the only way we got it done was in government partnership. But over the years, that has changed quite a bit. And as Julie mentioned, we could sometimes have a stack of 5 to 15 different funders, and getting escrow to close with all those different funders at the same time, super, super hard. So as funding from government has been reduced, as we lost our redevelopment agencies, we've had to get really creative in how we finance and what our stacks look like. And actually, as a side note, trying to simplify those stacks is really important, because the property management side on the other end, once you have a property and you've got it all going, you've got all these different accountabilities that you have to every lender who's given you money. And so there's a reporting requirement that makes all of that very difficult. So just recently, and I'm going to start with a project that we just closed, and then I want to jump into something that we're doing with Jonathan and Graystar, and then let Jonathan take it over. But we just recently closed on a project that was the first in San Mateo County. So cities now require things called impact fees, and those impact fees go into funds that the cities hold, and the county can as well, to use towards affordable housing. But accessing those funds can be really hard, because once the impact fee paid, say, by a commercial developer or a residential developer are paid into that fund in order to get their entitlements, the city has to figure out how then to distribute those. And that can be a very arduous process, right? It's expensive. They have to have staff. They have to take it out for competitive bid. You have to find land. I mean, it's just all these barriers to accessing the money. So as part of an acquisition strategy, we were approached by a commercial developer who didn't want to pay the city the impact fee. Instead, they wanted to put it directly into affordable housing. So as part of their entitlement process to get their building permit, we went alongside them side by side to say we have an alternative housing plan. And that is to take the equivalent of the impact fee, which in this case was $2,149,000, so a lot of money, and put it directly into an escrow account rather than sending it to the city. And as long as a property could be acquired within a certain amount of time, that money could be used to acquire the property, deed restricted as affordable, and preserve an existing property. City loved the idea. We went through the process, took us about 2.5 years, as it turns out. And there was a complication in that we identified a great property that would work. The city loved it. It met all their criteria, met all of my criteria as a preservation specialist. But we just weren't going to get that impact fee fast enough. So we had a social investor, a private person, who came in and said, you know what, I'm going to buy that property for you. I'm going to hold it for you. I'm going to give you the property management lease on it, and you master lease it. You take care of it as long as I don't have to deal with it. Then you can go forward, you know, and get those entitlements, get that impact fee. So what ended up happening is the purchase price was $3.3 million. The social investor was able to acquire that property for $3.1 million. We went into a a purchase agreement for the original 3.3 asking price. So now there's income, there's you know, revenue to be made on the social investor's side, and it's not unreasonable. We felt the 3.3 was actually a very good price for that property. That he was able to get it for 3.1 was, you know, good for him. In any case, it all worked out perfectly. We went through entitlements. It got passed. The 2.1 plus million went into an escrow account. The owner sold it to us for 3.3. The developer's super happy because his money got used right away. It didn't get stuck in a fund that was held by a city. The city's really happy because they don't have to figure out how to use that money, and the property became deed restricted affordable immediately upon closing escrow. And, you know, we're super happy because now we have 10 more units in our portfolio that didn't exist before. In addition, we only had the income from the property from the developer, that 2.149. We only had to take one other loan, and it was with a CDFI. It was through the Bay's Future Fund that's being held through the San Francisco Foundation. It was a CDFI. And they are social investors as well. So we only have 2 sources of income. One was outright, the other is an existing loan. So now we only have one reporting requirement. So that was kind of where we started. Oh my gosh, that's all 3 sectors coming together. Everybody wins, and it's a brand new model. And both the Bay's Future Fund had never been accessed before in San Mateo County, so we were the first, and the model of just diverting an impact fee directly into an acquisition was brand new. But now that foundation is laid. We've already been contacted by other cities who are interested in doing that kind of work. So if you're looking at doing projects, talk to your cities, find out how flexible they can be on some of those impact fees. It's really an important part of the tool. But from that, came the project with Jonathan at Greystar, where the next step in that evolution was, okay, how else can we use those impact fees to create housing and to bring it online faster and more efficiently than we would otherwise be able to do? So Jonathan, do you want to talk a little bit about what we're working on together?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we built on, basically what Kate had described. We learned about what was going on in that same city, and we were proposing a project that is of substantial size. It is, over 500 units and over 500,000 square feet of office. The office generates quite a substantial impact fee. And so similarly, we said, well, how can we utilize that fee in a way that, can best service the city? And what we did is we proposed a project where we're building ground up affordable housing units from the impact fee. And it's in large part because we looked around and said, well, geez, because of the size of this being around $11 million, it can actually be the quote unquote gap financing that most projects are looking for if the project is sized right. So we kind of scoured the city and found kind of a Goldilocks site, a site that it wasn't too small whereby we couldn't really give the city the units that really counted in terms of the money that they were going to be diverting. But we wanted it to be, it couldn't be too big because our whole point of this was to not actually access any city or county funds so they could be directed towards other affordable housing projects in San Mateo County. So the three funding sources, and it's a very unique project, the three funding sources are tax credits, permanent debt, and our impact fee. That is it. And so, with that comes a very kind of streamlined project, but has been a pleasure to have, HIP involved in that, and HIP will also be doing the management as we move forward, but they'll also be a partner in the project and have ownership. So it's kind of a win-win-win all around.
Great, thank you. Oh, Kate, go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of the biggest challenges for a for-profit in developing affordable housing, right, is they don't have access to property tax exemption. They're not a nonprofit. So they can use the state tax credit program, but then on the other end, it's hard to keep the rents low enough because you have to pay the property tax for that parcel. So the partnership has a lot to do with HIP Housing being able to provide the property tax exemption and the property management, because market rate developers often don't know, how to do the affordable, but also it creates a win-win again. So the commercial developer is able to build this, to essentially still own it. We get to the benefit of, some developer fee, the property management contract, the possibility of owning it at the end of a 15-year compliance period. The city gets 39 brand new units that they can count towards RENA. So everybody benefits from this, and it's completely outside the box to be doing something like this. But we all share in the responsibility, and we share in the benefit as well.
Great, thank you for that, sharing that innovative solution. So I can't not ask you all, the panelists, something actually that came up in the chat, and the press has been very brutal on Silicon Valley and housing, particularly in the area of kind of segregation, kind of institutionalized, and thank you, Julie, sending me. The Washington Post had also an article about mayors who are saying that kind of real estate is kind of at the crux of some of the problems we're having. And I can't remember who was talking about kind of NIMBY, this issue of NIMBY. Could someone on the panel want to jump in and talk about this social justice, racial justice issue in affordable housing? Someone? Julie?
Happy to. Right, so as Maya said, systemic racism has just been evidenced in our history, and even beyond when the Constitution provided equity to all, our government institutions continued to propagate racism. And so housing is a way of getting housing and people to be able to live in more places is a way to stop that. Home ownership is a wealth creator, and for years Blacks have been, the government agencies colluded to make sure that Blacks couldn't get the home ownership wealth building. So at Housing Trust, we have home ownership programs, and but there are a few homes available to even moderate income home buyers. But I think if we could find ways, and we're thinking about different programs in this avenue to direct more of these funds, or even lower cost loans or subsidies to encourage and kind of repair and make up to allow homeowners of color to participate in wealth building, because that's often where it all starts. And on rental homes, I mean, I think you can preserve diversity when you're, that we have in the Bay Area by preserving affordability in homes when they turn over. And I think Kate was talking about that too. Preservation is a huge thing. And also just looking at the affordable housing ecosystem as a whole, we're taking a look at that to see how can we work with our developers, work with our financiers to see if we can make efforts in this area, because it is one of the cornerstones of the problem and then the solution.
Yeah, I can just add on quickly to that. I mean, the topic that's becoming more and more that is bubbling up, at least in housing circles, is the issue around exclusionary zoning, not inclusionary zoning, but exclusionary zoning, particularly as it relates to the predominance of single-family only zoning districts, which is what we have in the Bay Area in abundance. The New York Times months ago now, but did a whole article on how much of cities are just reserved for single family only zoning, and I think in San Jose it's something like 93% of the whole land area of San Jose you can only put one unit on, and that has dramatic implications for folks getting into those neighborhoods, because a lot of time they have minimum lot standards which were put in place to keep out undesirables throughout the decades previous. And because you can only put one unit on a lot, it's just a matter of geometry that you can only put so many homes in an area. And so as people crowd in the Bay Area, because it's a magnet for jobs, those housing prices go up, and they keep folks that have historically not had wealth further away from getting wealth. And that, those are things that need to be addressed. And I was very heartened to see what happened in Portland last week around their single family zoning. And the really the 21st century kind of view that they have towards housing diversity in their neighborhoods, and hopefully California can take some cues from that.
Great. And Kate, I know in the past you've talked about how voters have really kind of become a little more sensitive about this issue over the years, and you've seen a change in your kind of experience in this sector.
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much voters, but it's political will that has changed. And that's key, right? I mean, and I attribute a lot of that to the Home for All effort. I mean, when I first was making my presentations, HIP Housing presents to all 21 municipalities in San Mateo County. And, the kind of questions I would get, if any at all, were, very sort of, showed a lack of understanding and a lack of sympathy towards the idea of the need for affordable housing. Communities saying things like, well, we don't need it, we don't have a problem here, that kind of mentality. But since Home for All came in about 5 years ago now, the kinds of questions I get, even from communities like Hillsborough and Portola Valley, have changed dramatically. And so what I'm seeing is a lot more political will to actually push housing through. And so building on that, I think, is critical. It's amazing to me who contacts me now to talk about some ideas or some strategies, or they have a seller who kind of wants to sell, but they want to sell to the city, and the city would own that as affordable housing, and then they'll send them our way to say, would you be interested in acquiring this, deed restricting it as affordable, and owning it, leasing it, selling it, whatever. So just a lot of new political will, and I think that's super important to keep those conversations going, and to keep on our local electeds that we value their change of heart, and that we need it if we're going to get things changed and done.
Great, thank you. And for the panelists, what recommendations would you have for residents on this call, or expand, who have means? Maybe they have extra property, maybe a commercial building, or they have a more property on their home. What recommendations do you have? How easy is it? And we have the whole ADU, but on donating property, how easy is that?
We had a property donated to us about 3 years ago. It's a 4-bedroom, 2-bath home. We don't deal in individual housing. We're really multifamily, but we do have one program, a social service program or SSP program, that benefits from shared housing of 2 of our clients. And we're able to use that now as a shared housing opportunity. It's right on the Facebook pathway, and it was pretty remarkable that they were willing to donate it to us. We did have some trouble getting property tax exemption on that property because there was no government funding on it, believe it or not. So there's a lot of criteria and restrictions around how the government gives property tax exemption, and that's critical to affordable housing. We also had a city contact us about a 7-unit property that we did end up acquiring, where the seller wanted to sell for market rate, but also wanted to keep their tenants intact. So the city referred them to us. I don't know that there's any one place necessarily to go if you want to sell your property. Your city, might be a good place to start. Talk to the housing and development folks in your particular city, and they might be able to refer you. I suppose you could actually reach out to Thrive, right, Thrive? And if you know about it, then you could send it maybe our way or field it. But I guess that's one of the things that we should talk about at some point within the county. If people do want to do something that's just socially responsible, donate, sell at whatever it is, that they need a one-stop shop to go to. So maybe that's a challenge for us in the housing community to create that opportunity.
Excellent. Jonathan, could you talk a little more kind of about zoning and density? I mean, there are many who say, the Bay Area still could be denser than it is. And, look at Singapore, look at Hong Kong. What are we going to go to that at some point? Should we?
Yeah, I think that's a common refrain. But I think there is a very wide spectrum between modern day California and Singapore, and we can get or Hong Kong, and we can add a lot of density in our existing urban fabric without having to take radical approaches to density. What I will say is that if you take a look, kind of the smart planning that's occurring right now. Is that we are concentrating, our density around transit nodes and along transit corridors. All of that, makes a ton of sense along, major arterials. I think, going from what you see now is a lot of kind of 1-story building. I mean, you can just drive down El Camino. I mean, obviously you're seeing, 5, 6-story, 5 to 7-story buildings popping up here and there, but it was born as kind of a 1-story, kind of urban, highway. And so that is kind of the next step that needs to occur, is we need to kind of infill in those areas. And I think it's appropriate where you obviously have issues is where, El Camino, for example, you have the adjacencies of the single-family home neighborhoods behind or just right off of El Camino. So there's tension there that occurs. But I think that is certainly the future. But I also say, again, I'm really want to uplift like housing diversity. And I know there's questions around ADUs out there, but, I think what we are primarily building in the core Bay Area, and that means the counties that are ringing the Bay, is this high density product type. And it is, I know that we have folks like Raj who are out, really trying to, tackle the cost of that, but these are just inherently very costly buildings to build. In essence, what I do is I kind of compare them to Teslas, right? I mean, you have elevator systems, you have, sophisticated mechanical and electrical and plumbing systems in these buildings that just make them inherently expensive to build. So it's like we're in the Bay Area, all we're building are Teslas, like the top of the line Teslas. And our policy response is to say to Tesla, you got to give 20% of your Teslas away to folks who can't afford your Tesla, or we're giving people money to buy the Tesla. But what we're not asking is the question of why aren't we building Fords and why aren't we building Hondas? Like, where is that in our urban fabric in the Bay Area from a new construction standpoint? And that's why I talk about the fact that the innovation can occur really on this lower scale, kind of smaller housing type that we've basically just zoned out to date. And we eliminated it really after World War II, if you kind of go back and look at our history. So I think there are opportunities around that. And that kind of housing type, I believe, can really be woven into the existing fabric of a neighborhood. But, you know, if you turn a, you know, 8,000 or 4,000 square foot kind of ranch house into a 2,000 square foot duplexes, it's the same form, it's the same house, it's the same size, but you've doubled your density, right? So you've allowed for additional density to take place without necessarily disrupting neighborhood character. And I think that's the conversations that we can have where we can kind of tone down the nimbiness, but hopefully get the density that we need in a variety of housing types. I would love to think everybody wants to live in a gray star community. That's not the case. They don't want to live in everybody doesn't want to live in high density buildings. So I think we just need to really be thoughtful about not only what we're building, but the cost of what we're building, because all units aren't constructed the same. They don't cost the same to build, and that's very important.
Excellent.
I'd love to jump in on that.
Please.
Jonathan couldn't be more accurate in that. There's so much opportunity that isn't, you know, super high density, and creating first-time ownership opportunities through condos and through townhouses is so important. And some of those are so beautiful, right? I always talk about on the fee side and the cost to build things. When you talk about affordable housing, our funding sources hold us to such a higher standard of what we have to provide. I say, you know, it's death by 1,000 fees. We end up, it costs us so much more to build because we have to build so much more into our performance in terms of the materials we use, what we can provide on the other side, like supportive services. A lot of low-income housing doesn't need supportive services. Some does, some doesn't. But if you have to do $500 a unit for supportive services every year, now your costs have gone up so much that maybe you can't do that project. You can't make it pencil in the long run. So, and you know, some cities now are requiring compliance fees. So they're charging us to come in and test our files that we've already put together to make sure that the affordability covenant is still intact. And that's a brand new fee, but that's, you know, $150 per unit on an annual basis. It all adds up. And so it's a very frustrating dynamic that we end up, that it costs us a lot more to build affordable. So really looking at where those fees are truly necessary and where they're not, where they can be waived. If there are ways to incentivize people to build lower income housing by, you know, changing some of the fees and restrictions on how we build, waiving some of the fees would be incredibly helpful. I mean, there's a ton of fees involved in building. And if the city really wants affordable, they need to help with the cost of that affordable.
We have questions coming in really fast and furious. So I want to, for the end of it, I want to start with kind of what you want the audience, our panelists, what do you want the audience to take away? Then we've got Petra, who's going to moderate a comments and question session. So let's start with Kate. Kate, anything you want to leave with our group before we go to the Q&A?
Sorry. One thing I'd like to talk about, I don't know if it's going to be part of a Q&A, just let me know, is some of the misconceptions people have about affordable housing, you know, what they walk away thinking it is or what the conventional wisdom is. Is that going to be part of the questions later, or can I highlight a few bullets?
Please do it.
Okay, so I think that one of the biggest misconceptions is who lives in affordable housing. Everybody thinks it's people who aren't trying, who aren't employed, but typically it's people who are either underemployed or service folks. I mean, most people have to have income in order to qualify for any kind of rental agreement. So I think there's a misconception about who lives there. I think there's a misconception about what they look like, right? Our projects are held to a much higher standard. They have to be beautiful. and they have to be well maintained. We are inspected at least once a year, and depending on the agency, sometimes twice a year. So we have to maintain those properties. I think that people believe that there's market forces that will create affordable housing in our area. That's just not true. That will never happen. We have to be intentional about it. And then the final thing, that people really feel that housing leads to more traffic, and that's not necessarily the case.
Excellent. Thank you for the takeaways. Julie, what would you want to leave us with?
I mean, we've covered a gamut of topics, and it might be a little overwhelming, but I think, you know, if you're an investor on this call, continue to invest or begin to invest in the different ways in affordable housing. If you do have some land, you want to donate, or you want to build an ADU in your backyard, that's an organic way to get more affordable housing. And if you live in a city with, you know, doing crazy things like these fees Kate's talking about, you would think they would be taking care of the affordable housing on their own as part of their own dime. Like, talk to your city, go to those council meetings. Now they're on Zoom, you can go and speak up for affordable housing.
Thank you, Julie. And Jonathan.
Yeah, you know, I'll kind of just piggyback on one thing that Kate was saying. You know, I think people, you know, and when I talk about people, I mean just the broader community just kind of believes that our housing delivery system is just functions by itself, and that we're actually, you know, building adequate amounts of housing for the folks that want to live here, and that's just certainly just not the case at all. And I think people who know this business know that. And I also just want to touch in about resources. I mean, you know, I am one that really wants people to focus on the federal retraction from providing housing, particularly amongst, you know, the lowest income of us, because that puts tremendous pressure on just our own regional resources. So before, where, you know, we may be able to have concentrated affordable housing in the 30% to, you know, 80% range, now affordable housing developers are being asked to go all the way down, you know, to 0% and actually just be the housing provider of last resort. And we're missing a big partner in that. And on the flip side, I think, you know, with the perceptions of market rate housing, how that has become, you know, kind of a topic that is taboo in some ways. Even the market rate can't, in a lot of ways, it can't function. It's not functioning appropriately to be a partner to try to deliver housing that is not subsidized to a wider swath of people. And so all those things have to really be working together for us to have a healthy housing market. But we're so far in this, I think people even have a hard time understanding what a healthy housing market really even looks like. But it's just going to take a lot of work to get there.
Thank you. Thank you. Petra, let me turn it over to you for comments and then questions, or statements and questions.
Great. We have had some amazing panelists, so thank you very much, and we want you absolutely to be answering questions. But before that, we also have an amazing audience. And there are a lot of people here who are deep in housing work in one way or another. And so I wanted to give people a chance to just do a quick 1 minute about what you are doing. And I wanted to start with Rebecca. Go ahead and introduce yourself and let us know what your project is.
Rebecca Mahler. I came to the Bay Area to actually oversee some high-rise residential projects in San Jose. And that was 4 years ago. I spent 3 years modeling projects, trying to get them to pencil and off the ground. I dealt with the affordable, the inclusionary fees, and being able to do what you're doing in the modeling and being able to convert that. And it's a challenging conversation to be able to get people on board to actually start seeing how to use it, because there's a lot of opportunity there if you can get a project to pencil. And so a lot of the projects in San Jose have turned into office buildings because they were approved for residential. But office buildings are going for like $7.50 a square foot for rent, and you can't charge that on residential. So I worked on a project for San Jose State for some affordable housing for faculty, and a light bulb went on with respect to, because I had a couple of models, and one had affordable housing in it, and then it was going to be below market rate. Well, below market rate, you really have to say it's going to be a fixed amount in order to be able to meet the incomes that is in that population, which is all of our teachers, professors, service workers, they fall into what we classify as affordable income ranges. And therefore the types of rents, if you want to say 30% of your income goes towards rent. So I read an article in the BBC and I started having an idea of how to be able to produce affordable housing at scale in existing communities. And it parlays off of the ADU laws that have been passed, but it's scalable, simplified, and it's not going into the backyard. It's not complicated for the homeowner. So I've developed a product whereby I can reutilize existing real estate. I can either sell the improvement to the homeowner or I can just lease the area from the homeowner and put the unit in. And when I lease it, that means that I control the rent. And I'm not using subsidies. I know there may be subsidies available. So right now I'm in the funding stage of this. And I am looking for increments that add up to $2 million. I can be out the door in 6 months. And with that 2 million, I can produce 900 units and be in the black, hole within a 12-month period of time. So right now I'm looking for my financial partners and really community partners, because there's a whole element of completeness with this. And I came from one sector and know it really, really well. So when I hear we're going to build 10 million units or 10,000 units, how many units we need, I understand how we're not going to be able to do that. And so for me, we have to have the innovation. We can innovate lots of different ways, but to have it scalable, I think I've got something that can help make that scalable quickly.
Rebecca, why don't you put your information in the chat so people can reach out to you?
Yeah, that'd be great. I invite anyone, I'm looking for those that can help me get to the start and finish, and to participate.
Great. Okay, next, a quick note from Paul Krupka, who's on the Housing Leadership Council board.
Good day. Great event, Petra, and thanks for the opportunity. I just want to make a quick advertisement and just put it in the text. Our Housing Leadership Day, an annual conference for some 20 years now, is coming up October 30th. I just sent put a link in the chat so you could go right to the Housing Leadership page. Please join us. We're looking for workshops too, and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.
Thank you. And then I'd love for Adriana Fernandez to introduce herself.
Thank you, Petra. Hi, everyone. My name is Adriana Fernandez Arriaga, and I am new with Nuestra Casa. I'm working as a housing and environmental justice coordinator. I'm new to the housing rules. At the moment, I'm just learning about all the different ordinances and measures that are coming up in East Palo Alto, and just getting up to speed with all the affordable housing stuff that's happening. So I'm happy to be here and just keep learning. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome to East Palo Alto. Is there anybody else who wants to talk quickly about what their projects are in the housing world right now? I know there are a lot of you on here. Okay, then we will go to questions. We've got some great questions in the chat, and I think we're going to start with those, and then we'll go to live questions. But there's definitely some questions about converting retail and office space into housing. Does anybody want to take that one? Does somebody see that as the future?
I mean, I'll jump in. I think it depends, and I'm going to say that a lot because I'm looking at some of the questions, because this is what real estate does. It depends on everything. But I definitely see that for a lot of strip centers that are anchored by fitness centers and things of that nature. I mean, I think we're going to really see a upheaval in retail coming out of COVID. I think that is one of the things that's going to really last through this whole issue. There's a question about the future of office and whether or not offices disappear. I don't think that's going to be the case, but will they be utilized in the same way? I don't know, but I definitely think there are plenty of opportunities in the state, in California and the Bay Area, and even San Mateo County, obviously, where you have retail centers or underutilized commercial centers that could certainly be transitioned into residential. if it makes sense. Unfortunately, I believe that the bill that was going to allow that to happen has just recently died in the assembly, which is unfortunate, but hopefully they'll take it up next year. But I definitely think for that it's the case. And it really depends on, some of these, old office parks, it's kind of less so, I guess, in the Bay Area because of the demand for office. But to me, it's really not so much, whether or not these can be repurposed. The real opportunity to me is to start mixing the uses. That's where we can really start cutting down on car trips and things of that nature. We have really homogenized how we have organized our land pattern, and the opportunity there is to really create mixed use districts where a number of things can be allowed, because that then gives developers the opportunity to really be more creative about how they solve a particular site.
So I just want to do kind of a follow-up. Is zoning kind of the big issue, and do you see zoning as a local issue or a statewide issue?
To me, it is the issue. This is my opinion. It is the single most impactful issue. If I could snap my fingers today and wave a magic wand, whatever you want to call it, I would do zoning reform and it has to be on a regional scale. You can do it within large cities. I petition Oakland to do stuff like that because it's where I live, but it really needs to occur on a regional, if not statewide level, because that's the way our land pattern has been built out, on a regional level. Our land pattern is not, it doesn't look at city boundaries, and people don't look at city boundaries, but to me, it is the limiting factor in terms of how innovative we can be, because it doesn't allow for innovation because of how prescriptive it is, particularly in the state of California.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Couldn't be more fundamental. Can you turn a commercial space into a residential space? Really depends on whether the city will let you. But there's the other factor that's involved. It has to be the cost. Are these buildings convertible? And what is it going to take? What's it going to cost to convert them? Is it cheaper just to tear them down and start over, and then you're back to building your whole finance stack and all of that all over again? I know that some very innovative developers in other communities are actually designing parking structures so that they can be convertible. So if you're in a commercial space or a residential space and you're required to have all these parking spaces that we know in our field we're not going to need, if you can design them so that they can be converted, get that infrastructure built in advance so that when we discover we don't need them any longer, they can be converted easily. That's part of I think the solution. So in spaces where we think there's a chance, if we could build them out ahead of time to be convertible into housing, that would be fantastic. So that's part of design.
And just the one thing I'll add about being able to, I'm sorry, Julie, just one thing I'll add about the ability to convert, that is the kind of the elephant in the room as well, is Prop 13, because that's the other thing. People don't have to do anything to their land in the state of California because they're not necessarily penalized for allowing land to sit underutilized. And so that is a huge issue when it comes to what are they actually generating from their existing land use. And Prop 13 plays a big role into all of that.
That's a really great point. Can you all hear me? One thing I want to say about zoning, I think with the big announcements this year from Facebook, Apple, and Google about the land that they have available that they're going to put towards housing, and it's got to all be zoned commercial right now for office. And so it'll be really interesting to see each of the cities where their land is, and maybe with the pressure from their big local companies, that zoning will be switched just because they're providing the land. And I'm interested to see how that's going to go.
Such a great cross-sector opportunity.
Yeah, it's also the cost of rezoning. So it's the cost, right? So I've done adaptive use, reuse projects. So I'm on with Jonathan. Then I'm thinking, but is that going to be affordable housing? No, that would have to be market rate housing, because you're making a major investment in an existing asset. You're not going to buy, unless you're buying them really at a discount. And even then, the cost of conversion. So we still need more housing. So it's just a matter of all of the things take time, and they cost money. And we've got to decrease the amount of what it takes to rezone something.
So we have one more question here that's also a very hot topic besides zoning, which is for developers, are they more inclined to do in lieu fees rather than contributing a percentage of units to affordable housing? And I know this is always a big question. It's like, what is better to get, in lieu fees or units of affordable housing that are mixed into the existing housing that people are building? So I'd love to hear your comments on that.
I can start. We're starting to see a shift in that. And it really, again, like Jonathan was saying, it depends on the project. Can the project weather the affordable units? Or like in Graystar's case, is it better to get 39 brand new units someplace else? There is some economy of scale when you group affordable housing together, especially if you're providing supportive services. So if you're really serving the lowest income folks and they have special needs, having the ability to provide services on site makes a lot of sense. So we're seeing developers coming to us now saying, we want to incorporate you into our development because that makes it much more sexy for the city. So we're actually going to build a little bit of housing on top that we're not even being asked to do, and we'll make it all affordable. We've got, an opportunity for that. And so I feel like it really depends on the project, and it would be lovely if cities could be a little bit flexible in how that works, to not have a one size fits every project, because just like every financing source and every gap financing piece is individual to each project, so is where does it make the most sense to have the housing? Where can you get the biggest bang for your buck?
Yeah, I agree. It is a big depends. It depends on what's the size of the in lieu fee. Then it depends on what's the percentage of inclusionary. So all that matters. But what it really comes down to is is a matter of how does a city or a jurisdiction or us as society want to use this money? Because there's an example of San Francisco that required all units to be put. At least I think in Rincon Hill, at least they all had to be inclusionary. But what that did is it starved the affordable housing community of any kind of gap funds or matching funds from the city of San Francisco. So it was an outcry that you actually needed flexibility to put the money into a fund that nonprofit developers could use to leverage their projects. And then there's a question of fairness. I worked on a project in Santa Clara where we were proposing single family homes, and the difference between the affordable sales price and the market rate sales price was something like $1.1 million. So should one family be the beneficiary of that kind of subsidy? Or is that subsidy better pooled in some other resource so it can be deployed in a different fashion? These are the questions around depth of subsidy and breadth of subsidy that are ongoing discussions, but they all play into that question.
Thank you. And we have another question. What's the price per square foot to build affordable housing? And the same question for market rate, which actually gets to the question of, is it different?
Jonathan, what's the market rate per unit in San Mateo County, or let's just say Redwood City, because that's.
I mean, if you're talking construction costs, it's for a type 3 building. I would say that is right in the realm of $400 a square foot to build. So if you kind of bring that out to a 1,000 square foot 2-bedroom, it's $400,000 per unit.
It's just construction costs. That's not.
That's just construction costs.
Yeah, right. So it's about $850 for development cost, wouldn't you say, Jonathan?
Yep.
Yeah, and I bring up the project that was just approved by I think Midpin in San Mateo. That was $800,000 unit. So I mean that gives you kind of an idea, and that's just kind of boggles your mind to think about that. And that's a nonprofit developer, so it's not that they're getting profits out of that $800,000. Right. It's just what it takes to bring it to the floor, and that really needs to be addressed in some real fashion, because to Kate's point, there are not resources available. At least that we currently have, that we can currently see that can really deliver that on any kind of scale. It's just,
we're looking between 800,000 and 900,000 for construction and development fees for affordable. And that's, you know, it's miserable. And I have to tell you, a lot of that is legal fees. We spend, because we've got, you know, 12 different funders, and you've got contracts and regulatory agreements with every different funder. The amount of legal fees is in of itself is staggering. If there'd be a way to consolidate that effort, that would be very helpful.
I think one thing that could be helpful is if the myriad California programs could be consolidated and coordinated and one source, right? Wouldn't that be a dream, one-stop shopping?
We need a Bitcoin system.
So I have one thing that I want to share as we're talking about policy and how to change things versus policy. I'm going to let you know about the next event that we have with Thrive coming up, because a lot of 501c3s think that they cannot advocate because they're 501c3s, and that is actually not true. 501c3s can and should lobby, and this is kind of exactly the example if you're lobbying for zoning or for changes to Prop 13 or things like that that would advance housing needs. So we'd love it if you join for these trainings so that you can find out exactly what 501c3s have as far as both restrictions and reporting, but you really are allowed to do quite a lot of advocacy. So that's my little Thrive commercial, but please join us, and you can just sign up for it at thrivealliance.org. So with that, I think we're going to hand it back to Maya to say thank you to everyone. A huge thank you to Maya for helping set this up and getting these fantastic speakers and doing a fantastic job for moderating. So thank you for your partnership in all of these series.
Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you, Kate Comfort Har, Jonathan Fern, Julie Mahwald, and Raj, who had to drop off. Thank you so much for your participation and your effort in this initiative. And I thank you. Check out Thrive, check out the Social Impact Advisory Group website, and have a great week. Bye-bye.
Very much. Bye-bye.
Kirsten, do you have the chat?
Yeah, I have it saved.
Okay.
Thanks.
And I will end the meeting.
Petra, before you end it?
Oh, yes.
Oh, I was trying to add something. This is Rita First Adams. I'm sorry. I've been lurking here. I was trying to get it in before you shut it off. I'm going to congratulate Thrive for bringing in Boulder advocacy. I've been to their programs I was in their early training when they did it strictly for attorneys. I was the only non-attorney in it. It is the best program in the United States, and I've been trying to promote it with other groups that I know as well. So I just want, number one, congratulations, because I think you picked the best resource. And I've noted some other California statewide groups bringing in other resources, but you are bringing in the most respected one. So thank you.
Oh, thanks. And please feel free to share that. Like, it's one of those things where it is actually all
right.
Valid for all of California, not just for San Mateo County. So feel free to share it widely.
I'm doing my best. But I tried to get something in on your chat, and I missed it. I wanted everyone here to know that the resource you're bringing in is respected nationwide. So thank you.
Yeah, they've been great. We did their training like 2 years ago as well, and they've just been fantastic with us.
Yeah, great resources. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.